so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life? Well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. Also, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to take about a minute and a half to tell you about a few sponsors that not only help to make it possible to produce this show 5 days a week, but that I'm also genuinely passionate about promoting. The first longtime stellar supporter of the show that I want to mention is Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online with over 8,000 video titles. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. The second sponsor I'm sincerely passionate about promoting is Purium. It's no mystery that bringing your mind, body, and spirit into balance is necessary if a person truly intends to manifest the greatest and grandest version of themselves. So if you've been looking for a way to easily get organic superfoods into your system every day with a simple plan that can help you reestablish a healthier foundation and relationship with food, like I was doing before I found Purium, I highly recommend going to positivehead.com/transformation and checking out the videos and interviews there where I dive deeply into discussions explaining why I take these products every day. And should you ultimately end up on iShopPurium.com to purchase any of their 50 plus amazing superfood products, be sure to use the code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, for a 25% discount. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's Soul Share, I'm very excited to have Dr. Andrew Gallimore here with me on the show. Andrew is a neurobiologist, chemist, and pharmacologist interested in the relationship between psychedelic drugs, the brain, consciousness, and the structure of reality. Andrew is also the author of a new book, Alien Information Theory, and currently works out of the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology in Japan. Super excited to connect with you all the way from Japan. Andrew, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, luckily you had some alien friends that were willing to beam you over for this, and I'm very grateful for that.
You're welcome.
It's the least they could do, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've no idea.
I want to find out. I want to get somewhat of an idea by the end of this conversation. How about that?
We'll try.
We'll do what we can.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to start at the predictable start that I always start with, and that is this question. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Oh, wow. Okay. My passion has been for the last 20 years has been trying to understand what the fuck this world is and how.
It's a good passion.
Yeah. And what is the relationship between the world that we experience and the world that's going on inside our heads and the world outside, and what can drugs, particularly psychedelic drugs, tell us about that relationship? I guess I would tell them that.
Okay, fair enough. Well, why don't we do this? If you could give us a little bit of your backstory, how did you end up on this, relatively unique and very interesting path that you are traversing here? Yeah,
it is a kind of a meandering path that I've been on since I was a teenager. I picked up, for reasons I'm not quite sure, I picked up a fascination with psychedelic drugs when I was about 15 years old. And, this was pre-internet, or was kind of just as the internet was in its very, very early days. So you couldn't couldn't find out about something by Googling it. You had to go to a library. The listeners, so that's where you had lots of books, basically. And I was at a friend's house, and I was leafing through one of his books, and there was a small section on psychedelics, and the usual suspects were there: LSD, mushroom, mescaline, and then there was this very short paragraph that's a DMT, and it described it as this short-acting hallucinogen similar to LSD, but only lasts 15 minutes. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. It didn't say what DMT meant. So I remember actually going to the library and finding one of these book of acronyms or initialisms and actually trying to look at what DMT meant. I got it completely wrong, first of all, but it wasn't in there. It was dimethyl terephthalate, the book gave me, which is it's a type of plastic, completely unrelated to the DMT, the drug.
Oh, wow. Yeah. If you smoke that, you're going to have problems.
Yeah. So that was the start. And that was my late high school period. So I was thinking about, what do I do for university? And I went down the original, thought, okay, chemistry makes sense, pharmacology. So I did that first of all. For my master's degree, I did chemical pharmacology. And then for my doctorate down in Cambridge, I did more biochemistry. So I was moving away from the chemical towards more kind of a biological fields of academia. And then for a couple of postdocs now, first in York and Oxford in the UK, and now in Japan, I've been working in neurobiology. So I've kind of spanned a number of fields in trying to understand these drugs, because I think you really need to have your fingers in quite a few different pies, so to speak, academically, to really understand what's going on with psychedelics. Yeah, so that's basically me now. And I've now, just with completing this book, everything has kind of come together in a kind of coherent narrative in my mind, which is why I wanted to get that book out.
Very, very fascinating. So, where to begin? So there's a lot to talk about here. Your book has just come out, and that sort of ties in, I'm anxious to kind of dive in with that and the alien tie into that. And, I don't know what, maybe you can start off just telling us a little bit about, what, obviously DMT being, it seems like a primary focus for you. I know you actually developed a method for extending the DMT state, which was very intriguing to me, with Rick Strassman, who did the spirit molecule, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I actually had Mitch Schultz on nice. A while back. If you guys aren't familiar, it's a wonderful, wonderful book, The Spirit Molecule, and Rick basically did all these studies on the effects of DMT, and so you worked with him directly. Then it sounds like, and actually extended, because DMT typically, as you mentioned, only lasting 15 minutes or so. It sounds almost like an ayahuasca sort of experience, which is a longer release DMT experience, right?
I mean, so I developed this model. I developed with Rick Strassman. I've never actually met Rick Strassman, believe it or not, but we communicate entirely electronically, such is the modern world, and it's worked fine. Yeah,
yeah, such is right,
but
probably easier.
Yeah, exactly. So. It's basically using techniques from anesthesiology. So in you want to put somebody to sleep for an extended period of time whilst you're, cutting open their chest or something like that, then what you do is you give them a very short-acting drug, but you give it with a programmable infusion device. And the idea is that if you get the infusion rate to the rate at which you're continuously delivering the drug into the bloodstream, if you get that rate correct, which is not straightforward, by the way, you can actually maintain a stable level of drug in the brain. And it occurred to me that you could use the same technique with dimethyltryptamine, with DMT, because it is a short-acting drug. It doesn't exhibit tolerance with repeated doses, which Rick demonstrated back in the 90s. So I basically asked Rick for his blood sampling data that I'd seen that he'd had these plots of DMT blood concentration versus time in one of his older papers. So I knew the data must have existed at some point. Unfortunately, he hadn't tossed it. So, he sent me this information, and I used that to develop this mathematical model of the way that DMT is distributed throughout the body over time. And this allows you to develop a infusion protocol, basically, that would allow you to bring somebody into the DMT state and then hold them there with a constant or relatively constant level of DMT in the brain over extended periods, thus extending the DMT state from 5 to 10 minutes to 5 to 10 hours a week. It could be any length of time. But ayahuasca, it ain't. A lot of people say, isn't that just ayahuasca? Right. And I say, no. We actually discussed this quite a bit in the paper, but people don't tend to read the paper before they criticize these days. So, but yeah.
Of course. Welcome to the modern era.
But ayahuasca, people have studied ayahuasca, a lot more actually than they have studied pure DMT, I would say. And actually, if you measure the blood DMT concentrations during an ayahuasca trip, it tends to peak at about 20% of the level that you reach with a breakthrough DMT hit. So ayahuasca doesn't even come close. It's like almost an order of magnitude lower levels of DMT than you achieve with either, just by smoking DMT in a little glass pipe, as is by far the most popular mode of administration. That will bring DMT levels very, very high in your brain, over 100 nanograms per milliliter, which is, we think that around 60 to 100 nanograms per milliliter in the blood is the breakthrough dose. So, but it's of course it's short acting. So as soon as you hit the peak, you're already starting to come down. And once your blood levels drop below this kind of breakthrough threshold, you pop out of the DMT space again. So our idea is that you would bring someone into the DMT space and keep their brain levels above that threshold without pushing them so deep that they just black out and forget everything.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely had some DMT experiences with and there's various kinds, right? There's like NN DMT, and then 5-MeO, which of course is Sonoran Desert Toad. And, I had an experience, and just a reference to you guys, if you want to go back to some archived episodes, I pulled them here before I forget. Episode 682 is with Tricia Eastman after she had administered that experience. And that was that episode was all about having a 5-MeO experience, which is quite different even from the NN DMT experience. And then if you go all the way back to episode 6, it's talking about an ayahuasca experience that I had, and with a shamanic facilitator. And then episode 64 is with Mitch Schultz, who did the documentary The Spirit Molecule, which is all about Rick Strassman's book that Andrew is referencing here and who he worked with. So those are just some archives there. Obviously, this is a fascinating topic and one that I've explored firsthand. And I don't know. I think the main thing that's going to be interesting for me to dive in with you is like some of your work on, how you view the relationship between the external world, our reality, and this idea that I can't remember if it was Rick or someone who made the comment that really stuck out to me is like, perhaps our whole reality is just a DMT trip. It's in everything. It's in so many things, it's in us organically and naturally. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think it's this foreign, crazy substance that you're putting in your system when it's actually naturally occurring all over the place, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dennis McKenna once said, or said a number of times, that reality is a serotonin hallucination.
Yeah, okay.
That may be what you're thinking of.
Yeah, it could be. I could have gotten confused.
Yeah, I think what's a mistake that a number of people make, and actually I dare say, I'm bold enough to say that Rick Strassman has made this mistake before in print, is to say, it's basically when you're thinking about the DMT experience and trying to ask yourself, well, is it real? And one way to approach that question is to say, is it actually something that's going on outside your head, or is it all in your head? Right. That seems to be the way that we distinguish between the real and the non-real. I mean, how many times have people said to you, "Oh, it's all in your head"? If you have some kind of false belief, or you've seen something that couldn't have been there. If you've seen a ghost, right? People say, "Oh, it's all in your head." But what people don't realize is that all worlds, everything you experience, is always all in your head. Now, I need to qualify that. Now, I'm not saying that everything that you experience is completely unrelated to what's going on outside your head. Not at all. There is a relationship, but it isn't the kind of relationship that most people assume. Most people think that we open our eyes, and then, like a video camera, the brain kind of captures a picture of the world and then presents it to your consciousness somehow. That's not how it works. The brain is basically it's an information generator. It's a world building machine. The brain is constructed from billions of highly interconnected cells, which we know is called neurons, as well as many other types of cells. And these cells communicate with each other, and they generate information. They generate extremely complex patterns of information. And that extremely complex pattern of information that your brain generates moment to moment is your world. It's literally your world experience. The world you experience is that information being generated by your brain. And that's always the case. And that's the case whether you are awake or whether you are dreaming. So dreaming is a really interesting way to get a handle on this, because dreaming and people have studied this. If you look at the structure and content of dreams are generally continuous with waking. This is known as the continuum, the continuity hypothesis of dreaming, which says that when you go to sleep and you dream, it's actually a continuation of your waking life. And people have actually actually measured the phenomenology of dreaming, actually measured the amount of time you spend doing mundane activities in your dreams. How much time do you spend watching TV? How much time do you spend speaking on the telephone? And they seem to be the same proportions of time as you do in real life. And this tells us something very interesting about dreams. Dreams are worlds constructed in exactly the same way, and using exactly the same information as the world that's constructed when you are awake. Right?
Interesting.
That's really important. Now, what's the difference then between an awake state, an awake world, the world you experience when you're in normal waking life, and the dream world? The difference is that when you are awake, small amounts of sensory information, we call extrinsic information, modulates, if you like, and guides the patterns of information being generated by your brain. But sensory information from the outside world never really gets into the brain. It kind of tickles and nudges and modulates and regulates and stimulates the patterns of activity. But the brain is always constructing your world from information, whether you're awake or asleep. And it's so good at it that when you go to sleep and there's no sensory information, the primary means by which the brain receives information from the external world are completely cut off. And yet the brain is perfectly capable of building a world that is almost indistinguishable from the normal waking world. And the reason it's almost indistinguishable is because it's built from the same stuff. It's built from information generated by your brain.
Wow. And so what do all of the analysis and work, obviously you've gone a lot deeper down the psychedelic rabbit hole than the average bear. So what is your sort of, what have you learned from it? I mean, what has it taught you about the ultimate nature of reality and what's going on here?
So it's taught me many things. I mean, it's taught me about the way that reality is fundamentally structured and the confusion that can arise between the way that we distinguish between this one's subjective reality and actually what's going on in the external world. That actually the world is much more fluid than we imagine it to be. We imagine this world to be this fixed, stable, predictable structure that kind of exists there and it's independent of us and it cannot be changed. And yet, when you take 2 or 3 dried grams of mushrooms, the world changes and it changes dramatically. And this is a really important point. It isn't that these psychedelics are distorting your world or causing a distortion of reality. They are literally changing your world. Now, does this mean that the psychedelic state, the world experienced under the influence of magic mushrooms, for example, psilocybin mushrooms, does that mean that this psilocybin mushroom world that you experience is somehow less real? No. What it means is that the relationship between the external world and the world being the model of the world being generated by your brain has changed. And one cannot say that it's changed to become less real or less true because the brain has no way of measuring truth. There's no yardstick for truth as far as the brain is concerned. The brain constructs a model of reality, which is the world you live in, built from information generated by the brain. It generates this model of reality in order to try and survive and make sense and make predictions that lead to positive outcomes. You see something in your running towards you in the distance that looks like a tiger, and it happens to be something that could harm you, and you run up a tree or something, or you shoot it. These are decisions you make that will lead to a positive outcome for you and make it more likely that you will survive to reproduce. That's the yardstick by which evolution measures and judges things. How successful is a model? So an example I always give is imagine your brain. You had a brain that constructed a model of reality that was wrong. Let's imagine a brain that constructed a model of reality where all snakes were fluorescent purple. Right? Now, if you think about that, would that be less advantageous or more advantageous than a world in which you see snakes as they are?
That would be less advantageous.
Why is that?
Well, if you think all snakes are purple and you come across a rattlesnake that isn't purple and you go to pick it up and put it in your pocket, you might have a problem.
That's true, but all snakes appear purple, so even rattlesnakes. All snakes appear purple. So my point here, and perhaps I'm...
I see.
My point here is if you see all snakes as being fluorescent purple or fluorescent yellow, they're going to be extremely easy to spot.
I see what you mean. I thought you were like, if you were like imagining it to be, that was the information you had, but it actually wasn't the case. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So your brain constructs a model of reality, a world that you experience where all snakes are fluorescent yellow or fluorescent purple. That might actually be beneficial. It's a very
Yeah.
It's a very crude.
It's like putting a target on.
Yeah, it's a very crude and kind of, in a sense, totally unrealistic example, but it gives you this idea that the evolution doesn't measure the brain isn't trying to somehow build a more and more accurate or correct model of reality. It's simply building the most adaptive, the one that's most successful. It's simple as that. And so you can't say that the world you experience in normal waking life is somehow the real thing, right? You can't say that. And so that means you certainly can't say when you're under the influence of magic mushrooms that or any psychedelic drug, that the world you experience is somehow a distortion or a deviation from reality.
Right.
All worlds, in a sense, are equally real in that all worlds are built from the same type of information generated by a brain. What can differ is how that information, how that model of reality relates to what's going on in the environment. And sometimes, your model of reality under normal circumstances actually only selects it samples data from the environment. It doesn't take in everything that's available. It samples data and constructs a model of reality that is functional. And what psychedelics seem to do is allow a lot more information to actually enter the brain. And this is why the world seems a lot richer and fuller, and the colors seem brighter, and it seems a lot less stable and a lot less predictable and more fluid, and all of these things. This isn't a distortion of reality. It's perhaps a model of reality that is, in the long term, if you were to stay in that state, it might be less adaptive. You're less likely to survive if the world is constantly shifting. But it's not an untrue or a false model of reality. It's just a different model of reality.
Interesting, yeah. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the correlation of what's going on, in the brain at the time someone is under the influence of one of these substances as well. I think it's very interesting how you see the connectivity of the parts of the brain, the different hemispheres and everything that sort of is mirrored in what your perception is, of course, a big takeaway for a lot of people is feeling the connectedness of everything and the oneness of all things. And so I think that's really fascinating how you see that mirrored within the brain when you scan, someone under the influence.
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of functional neuroimaging work that's been done in the last few years, largely by the awesome team at Imperial College London, has demonstrated this fact. The brain is very good at organizing its activity, organizing the patterns of information in order to, for example, to separate the world into specific objects with which we can have certain types of interaction. So we look around ourselves and we're familiar with everything. We know about distances between what we define as objects and how we can interact and navigate this world. And when you take a psychedelic drug, you actually see that this organization, this strict separation between parts of the brain, for example, and patterns of activity in certain parts of the brain start to break down. And you start to see parts of the brain speaking with each other that weren't speaking with each other before. And so this seems to make sense with this idea that the world is becoming a lot less stable and predictable and becoming much more novel and interesting and rich.
Right. I mean, to me, it's fascinating to watch how it's been looked at as this awful thing to do, to take psychedelics, to now all of a sudden, it's getting so much more attention. Obviously, we just had what happened over, here in Colorado. I don't know. I'm sure you probably saw this, but Colorado legalizing psilocybin mushrooms, that is a huge milestone. And I'm curious what you think about sort of the renaissance, the what was once so demonized now being viewed as so absolutely beneficial and helpful. And of course, like anything, too much water is bad for you, right? I mean, things can be, it can be overdone, and of course, it's always a fine line from my perspective with substances. I had a friend who put it recently in a way that I really liked, and she is like, if it's being used as an escape, then you probably have an issue that you need to deal with it. If you're using it as to enhance your experience, then you're probably on a good path. Escapism versus I want to enhance my experience or I'm trying to get away from my problems and run or whatever. And so I think that's a really interesting way to look at it when approaching these powerful medicines from my perspective.
Yeah, fundamentally, I think that firstly, and the most fundamental point is that no government should be dictating what states of consciousness are legal and illegal, and that's basically the point here. It's nothing to do with the mushroom or psilocybin even. It's to do with what this drug does to your consciousness. That's what's illegal, really.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's insane. You know, cognitive liberty. You know, our consciousness should be our own business and nobody else's business, as long as we're not harming anybody else. So fundamentally, this vote in Denver was, I agree, it was hopefully the beginning of a tide of these kind of votes being passed across the USA and maybe even across the world. So first of all, that's the most fundamental thing. And of course, there are many ways to take these drugs. And some people will say that they should only be taken in a clinical setting. Some people say they should only be taken in a spiritual setting. Or some people say, oh, you can just take them for fun. And I think all of these approaches are valid. I don't think we should... I'm not one... There are these... I don't want to use the term psychedelic fascists, but there are these people that have this very, very intransigent idea of the way these drugs ought to be used. And I think, no, every individual has the right. And there's nothing wrong with recreation, by the way. It's a very Victorian idea that if something is enjoyable and you do for fun, that it's bad. If you take a drug for fun, we people go skiing for fun. People go hang gliding for fun or rock climbing.
I've taken a lot of psychedelics for fun myself. I'm guilty.
No, absolutely. Why not? As long as you're not harming yourself, as long as you're doing it with you're educated and you know what you're doing and you've received the right information. That's the key.
Right place, right context, right mindset when you're going in.
Exactly.
All of that.
And you have to take personal responsibility for your action. And as long as you do that, then you can take them for whatever you like. Yeah, you might get spanked by some insectoid being on the other side. If you take the piss, as we say in the UK, but that's your own business. And I don't think we should be dictating to people how and when and why they should be taking drugs. And that's quite dangerous, I think. And there seems to be within this loose psychedelic community, there are certain people that would say, you need to take it in this context. This is what the drug is, and this is how you should do it. I think we need to back off and let people do what they want. So recreation, fine. Spiritual awakening, satori, whatever you want to call it. I think that's also perfectly valid. And self introspection and trying to work out what this world is. These are the kind of reasons I'm interested in it. I don't see it as outwardly or explicitly spiritual in a sense, because I don't really know what spiritual even means. So I take it for trying to understand myself and trying to understand the world and the relationship and what the hell we're doing here in this crazy little ball on this crazy little ball, right? So that's my perspective. And then, of course, there's the clinical perspective. And I think personally that in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to see literally a revolution in psychiatry that could be compared to the revolution in physics when you went from Newtonian to Einsteinian, from Newtonian to relativistic physics. That was paradigm shift. And we're going to see a paradigm shift in psychiatry. We're going to go from the state where people go to a psychiatrist and they give them one of 5 or 6 classes of drugs, and then they treat them until the drugs stop working, and then they give her another one. And this goes on until the person either dies or until all the drugs stop working. This kind of approach, and we're going to go from there to where basically psychiatric conditions are managed, to where psychiatric conditions are treated and cured within a very short period of time, as in 2 or 3 months, to 2 or 3 psychedelic drug sessions with follow-up, rather than years and years of toxic medication. That's enormous. That is truly going to be a medical revolution. I think it ought to be supported, but we can't fall into the trap of thinking that people who use psychedelics for other reasons are in a sense going against that idea. I don't think that's true at all. Everyone can. There's room enough in the psychedelic space for us all to exist, whatever our motives for taking psychedelics.
There is no one size fits all. And I agree with you fully. People oftentimes will get caught in this idea of what's right for me is right for you, or of people who I can think of a friend who had a substance abuse problem and now is very clean with what they put into their system, and therefore no one else should do any sort of a substance, and it's like, well, yeah, I understand for you that makes full of sense. You also have these very profound sort of spiritual gifts that have unfolded for you, and that's great and wonderful, and someone else's path might be using a substance to sort of open their third eye, if you will, if that indeed is what's going on. And so I think we got to be really, really careful to say, because I do it, you should do it, or because I do it this way, you should do it this way, or because I don't, you shouldn't. Yeah. It's like we are all unique emanations and have our own unique trajectory and path, and certainly some of us will have plenty of crossover, but I think we got to be really, really careful with that falling into my way or the highway stuff.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So, I'm curious, with your research, of course, as I mentioned, I've had a 5-MeO DMT experience one time and NN multiple times. I've explored that. I'm curious if DMT is the one that you found to be the most profound in your studies, or, I personally have really enjoyed ketamine as a psychedelic substance, and of course I've tried the gamut. Not all of them. There's all the even these research chemicals and things now. There's a lot of things out there, but I've tried most of the the well-known ones for sure. I'm curious what you found is. Is DMT been the primary thing that you've studied, or are there others, and how you sort of compare them in your own work and mind?
I think for me, DMT is I call myself a DMT exceptionalist, in that I really do see DMT as, again, echoing Terence McKenna, not as a secret, but the secret. I think it is absolutely the most, one of the top, most important molecules on the planet. And I think it offers something that the other psychedelics don't offer me, at least in normal doses, that it offers me a direct access to the kind of fundamental structure of reality. And
right.
The insights that I've received from DMT permeate the book that I've written on the subject. I really feel that DMT has this extremely profound, inconceivably profound message to impart to us, and if only we could decode it. And I think now we're learning to decode this message. I think it really is. It has so many astonishing kind of qualities and peculiarities that make it stand up and say, "Hey, look at me." It's right. Simply, it's the fact that it's everywhere. Dennis McKenna, again he says, "Nature is drenched in DMT." It's everywhere you look at. I live on Okinawa. This is a small island, and it's right next door to Taiwan. There's another little country, a little island country next to us. And both these islands, they're covered in Acacia confusa. It's everywhere. And of course, Acacia confusa contains very high levels of DMT. Both of these little islands are drenched in DMT. Now, the locals would have absolutely no idea that they are that they are
Swimming in DMT,
swimming in DMT all the time. Yeah, but that's what astonishes me. And also, so first of all, it's the ubiquitous nature of this drug. It's like everywhere, and yet when you look at the drug chemically, as a pharmacologist, when I look at it, if someone put the structure of DMT in front of me and says, "What do you think that will do?" I say, "Well, that's not going to be very interesting," and I'll tell you why. Basically, DMT is similar to serotonin. Without getting too technical, serotonin has two important groups, or actually three. There's the what's called the indole ring, and this is the two hexagonal and a pentagonal ring attached to each other. You'll see these. This is called an indole. So all of the tryptamines have this. But serotonin, which is your one of the most important neurotransmitters, neuromodulators really in the brain, has two other groups that are important. One's called a hydroxyl group, OH, oxygen and hydrogen. And the other one is called an amine group, which is a nitrogen with two hydrogens on it. And these two groups are really important for when serotonin locks into these receptor sites in the brain. These groups kind of anchor the molecule in the correct orientation so that it has the correct effect at this receptor site. Now, DMT doesn't have either of these. Well, it has one, but the amine group, this nitrogen, is actually blocked by two big carbon atoms. And studies have actually shown that these two carbon atoms, what are actually called methyl groups, they actually block this amine, this nitrogen, from actually having any interaction with the receptor. So that's gone. Forget about that. And then the hydroxyl, which you have in serotonin, is also missing in DMT. So it's like there's nothing there. In pharmacology, when you're thinking about the way a drug acts at a receptor, you have something called the pharmacophore, which is which parts of the molecule interact with which parts of the receptor. And often you will see that molecules have, this bit has a little bit of a positive charge, this has a negative charge, this has a hydrogen here or an oxygen here, and you can kind of see how it interacts with the receptor. With DMT, it looks like this entirely blunt instrument that should do nothing. And yet, when it enters the brain, it doesn't just not do nothing. It has these most
crazy effects,
insane effects on consciousness, astonishingly insane, unbelievable, unenglishable effects on consciousness. That's amazing to me. So it's not just the experience, and then when you actually have the experience, of course, that's really that's the game changer. That's what really changes your mind. If you're not convinced by the pharmacology or the ubiquitous nature of DMT, or the fact that it only lasts 2 or 3 years, it's so easy, it's so rapidly managed and metabolized and removed by the body. And the fact that it doesn't have its subjective tolerance, and all of these unique peculiarities of DMT, to me as a pharmacologist, they scream, "Look at me! I'm
something
different.
Special."
Yeah, I'm different. So DMT, in that sense, I think it is fundamentally different. However, I also love other psychedelics, and I would guess my second love would be the psilocybin mushroom. And I think that it's a wonderful thing, and again, it's a democratic drug in that it grows everywhere pretty much in various different psilocybe species, but it's also very easy to cultivate now. I like that idea. I like the idea that it doesn't matter that the legal status of a drug is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the government want to do. They want to control something. Well, you can't. I'm sorry.
Talk to God.
Yeah, exactly. It's not possible, because all you need to do is, a spore print. If you can mail a spore print to somebody, you can they can grow their whatever strain they're interested in growing. You can send them a spore print, and then within 2 or 3 months, they've got the mushrooms, and they can do that, of course. And then the spores replicate. And you can get another spore print. You can send that around the world. So I love this idea that the government, try as they might, we can just wrench these drugs and say, "I'm sorry, but this ain't ever going to work, I'm afraid."
Right.
Yeah.
You're in over your head.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's not true with all drugs, of course. I mean, I wouldn't know if I wanted to,
Right.
if I wanted to get hold of some good quality 2CI or something, it might be slightly trickier. You have to know certain people. You have to go on the dark web.
Right.
And things are a little trickier there. But with mushrooms and with DMT, in fact, because it's ubiquitous, you've got a lot of choice of where you might extract it from. So I like this idea. And I actually, kind of as an aside, I've been thinking a lot recently about the next revolution in the procurement of drugs by individual illicitly. And I was reading a paper, and it was quite well publicized. It came out in Nature in February, I believe, and it showed how biochemists had genetically manipulated this yeast to produce THC and other cannabinoids.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and actually, genetically engineering yeast is actually relatively straightforward. I mean, it's slightly trickier than some of the simpler microorganisms. But when I was working in Cambridge in the biochemistry lab, genetically manipulating organisms was a routine task. You did it on a daily basis. It took a little bit of time to complete the genetic transformation, so to speak, but it wasn't difficult. The difficulty is getting putting the correct genes into the organism to get it to do what you want. But if that can be achieved with THC, and once of course you've got this genetically modified strain, you don't need to make it again. You just need to grow it. So making THC is as simple as putting some yeast into some, perhaps even something as simple as a sugar solution, and then basically leaving it for a week or two, and then extracting very simply the THC. And I see this being, once people get wind of this idea, and that actually it's not that difficult. THC is slightly trickier because THC is actually quite a complex molecular structure. But DMT is two steps from tryptophan. So you need to decarboxylate, get rid of this carbon dioxide group, and then you need to put two methyl groups, these two carbons on the nitrogen. And then you got DMT. And these are very, very simple processes. So once an enterprising biochemist working in some lab somewhere across the world thinks, I can introduce these two genes into yeast, no problem. Then you can basically feed the yeast tryptophan, and then a few days later you'll get pure DMT, and that can be repeated with pretty much any drug you think about. And once that happens, the cat really is out the bag. You can't. Very difficult to maintain control of microorganisms once someone decides that actually we're going to start shipping these around the world, because they'll be indistinguishable from normal baker's yeast. So completely indistinguishable. The only way
time for them to throw in the towel on the war on drugs. And the thing that I want to really just point out for people who aren't really, a lot of listeners are probably very experienced with psychedelics, but there are probably some who are like, what are these guys talking about? They're wrecking their bodies and their minds, and they're, and actually that's the thing. This is way different. We're not talking about narcotics. We're not talking about heroin or cocaine or things that really do damage to the body. I mean, even mushrooms, isn't there new research showing that it actually stimulates new brain cell growth?
Yeah, precisely. So neurogenesis. Which is
true, like unheard of, right? I mean, that's just fascinating.
Oh, it's astonishingly fascinating, because for many, many years now, that the dogma in neuroscience was that we don't get new brain cells. We have
It stops when you get old or whatever.
Exactly.
Or grow out of childhood.
Exactly. So after adolescence, when basically you get this what's called a pruning effect, so a lot of the neurons are destroyed basically, and connections are broken, and basically you get your setup of your brain then into adulthood and beyond. It was always assumed that once you lost a brain cell that you couldn't get new ones, but this has now been challenged, and amazingly, as you say, psilocybin has been shown, and I think others as well. I can't think off the top of my head, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a number of these agents that could be used stimulation.
Unlike alcohol, which is rampant and which destroys brain cells. And so it actually, I mean, like I said earlier, anything can be abused, but for the most part, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I'd talked to someone who'd used, psilocybin mushrooms and even just one time and had a profound, permanent, life-altering perspective shift as a result, that was highly, highly beneficial. And so, I think that's a really important thing to take into consideration, especially for people who aren't familiar and maybe have only all they know is what they've heard. And, it's like I think of talking to my mother. This is really hard for her to wrap her brain around because she's never, hardly smoked a cigarette, much less DMT, mushrooms. What are you doing to your brain? Like, oh my gosh, you're going to lose yourself. And it's like, the walls are slowly coming down, thankfully, but there's a lot to overcome here. That's been, a lot of disinformation that and ignorance, even maybe authentic ignorance that just has been spread so far and wide for so many decades.
Oh yeah,
so
I mean, a lot of people have a hell of a lot to answer for. Basically, we're in a situation now which we're slowly showing signs of recovering from, where it's impossible to have a rational conversation about drugs. You learn about drugs are bad from when you are a child, and all drugs are lumped together. So alcohol is not a drug, according to this model, of course. Nicotine, tobacco, they're not drugs. No. Drugs are these ones, which we say are drugs.
Caffeine,
of course, that's not a drug, of course, no. So it's only the drugs that we define as such and define as being evil and bad, and that's really the end of it. And then you get a lecture from a police officer who will tell you what will happen to you if you get caught with these drugs, and that's about it. I remember an interesting story about Alexander Sasha Shulgin in I think it was in Tikal, and he was talking to a police officer who had just finished giving a lecture about drugs in the usual way that police officers do. And Shulgin said to him, what would you do if I came to your police station and started giving you advice on arrest procedures? And the policeman said, well, I'd say you weren't qualified. And Sasha Shulgin said, well, that's my point, right? Here you are. So, and often, I mean, I've looked at this when I was teaching. I looked at this. I actually did a survey with students and asked them, how did you learn about drugs when you were at school? And the vast majority, it was police officers. It wasn't pharmacologists. It wasn't doctors. Right. It wasn't medical professors.
Psychonauts who've actually explored these substances.
No, it was police officers, and that's very interesting. It's drilled into you from a very early age that drugs are associated with crime and law. It's a law enforcement issue, and you get no idea about actually the differences between drugs and which drugs can be taken safely, which drugs really are quite dangerous. And that's really when all drugs are tarred with the same brush, and people don't have a chance to actually think rationally about them. And I live in Asia, so I live in Japan, and unfortunately, I'm afraid Asia it swallowed Nixon's pill, and it ain't about to throw it back up again. And so in Asia, they have this draconian attitude to drugs, and it's really sad actually, because
of all things to swallow,
exactly,
they swallowed the wrong pill.
Exactly.
Give them some DMT. Come on.
So
Sorry, I was going to say, some people really, like to differentiate and be careful with the words, entomology, like because you think of drugs or psychedelics, and you think of something maybe even always man-made, whereas I think of back to episode 6. I referenced my friend Pablo Miller, who leads shamanic journeys, ayahuasca, and he likes to really make the distinction between drugs and entheogens being a substance that's naturally occurring, a plant origin that causes this non-ordinary state of consciousness, and oftentimes done in sort of a sacred sort of ritualistic ceremonial setting with a lot of intention, and not necessarily about the party, but more about the experience and growth and everything like that. So I think that's a really interesting distinction to make too. something that's, cocaine made in the jungle with gasoline and, all this or meth labs, think of something like methamphetamine, made in these awful ways with this awful substances versus entheogen, a psilocybin mushroom, ayahuasca, DMT, coming naturally from the earth from some intelligence that created and put it here, and that does absolutely no harm to the body. Then they're really two very, very different things, and it's an important distinction.
I think
and even referring to them as medicines, as opposed to drugs.
That's true to an extent. I think we need to be a little bit careful about separating. To me, it's a kind of a false dichotomy, because humans we are part of nature, and and plants are extremely good chemists for sure, and they're extremely inventive chemists, and they make a range of compounds. And so it's kind of unfair, I think, and anti-kind of humanistic to say that when plants invent new chemicals, it's natural. But when humans invent new chemicals, it's bad. It's man-made.
You know why I like that? Andrew? Because my favorites are I prefer LSD over psilocybin. Mm-hmm. I prefer ketamine over DMT in my experience. And just to kind of compare, and of course the ones that I'm preferring have been man-made, very similar in a lot of ways. But so I'm with you on that, and I've actually made that exact point. It's okay, we've doctored up a lot of things to get to where we are. So to say that it's instantly bad, I actually do agree exactly with what you're saying, and I've made that point before. But you have these, some people that I come across, certainly in the transformational community, and once again, you got to always be careful with the pendulum swinging too far, and it gets judgy about that's man-made, and this came from the earth, and that's therefore that can't be good, and this has got to be good, and it's like these sort of these imaginary lines in the sand. Yeah.
And sometimes I get some of the criticism I get for my suggestion that you should use continuous intravenous infusion with DMT is that it's we shouldn't be bringing this kind of modern needles and this kind of technology. I always point out that ayahuasca is a technology. It's a technology for extracting, bringing two plants together, extracting
to do the same
components, doing a very crude extraction, but it's a technology. And yes, just because we have very advanced technologies doesn't make it more of a technology that we're doing now. So we have to. These dichotomies are often set up, and when you actually analyze them, they just fall apart. They don't make any sense unless you completely separate humans from the natural world, which doesn't seem very spiritual to me. To suggest that anything that humans does is unnatural, and yet everything that all the other species on the planet do is perfectly natural. I don't like that. So I think we have to be careful. I don't really distinguish between natural and unnatural. And as you say, some of the most interesting drugs are the ones that have been invented. I mean, think about 2CB. I think is a wonderful drug, and that's completely from the lab of Shulgin. So, and ketamine as well. I think we need to be careful about that distinction. We should just differentiate between drugs based upon, are they useful? Are they interesting? Are they harmful? Those kind of questions, rather than is it man-made or is it not man-made? Because botulinum toxin is natural, but who's going to swallow that? Right. There's some natural things you definitely want to steer clear of. Good point. Yeah. I like it. Well, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit and hear hear about your book. I'd love to hear, just the name in general, Alien Information Theory. And I know, one of the things we haven't even gotten to yet, and I'm assuming this ties into the book, not having had the chance to read it yet, but this sort of idea of intelligent entities that are experienced during a DMT trip. And a lot of times it being, sort of this cosmic sort of energy or alien-esque energy that people feel an association with. I haven't had that experience with DMT personally, but I know a lot have. So I would love to, kind of hear your take on entities that probably the vast majority of people experience during a DMT trip. And then, of course, I'd love to hear all about your book, or, as much as we have time for. Sure, no problem. So when it comes to entities, one thing that obviously they're extremely common in the DMT state. Many people report meeting and interacting with entities. And not only are they seem to be alien not in the spaceship sense, but alien in the sense of being completely unrelated to any kind of being that we find on Earth. But also their level of intelligence. And that to me is the most striking thing, is that these beings seem to have hyper intelligence. They seem to be many orders of magnitude higher levels of intelligence than us. They seem to be much more powerful beings. I don't think gods is the right word, or they're often described as such. Because when you meet something that is a million times more intelligent and older than you, then that's perhaps a reasonable way to describe it, But I think intelligence is a really important idea, because I think as species emerge, species complexify, species evolve, intelligence seems to be something that it's a universal feature of complex life. All species seem to evolve towards greater and greater intelligence. And that makes perfect sense, in that if you want to survive in this very, very complex world around you, you have to be able to make complex decisions. You have to be able to plan for the future. You have to learn from mistakes you've made. You have to remember things. You have to, all of these things require intelligence. And so it doesn't surprise me that wherever a complex living organism of whatever form emerges, whether it's on Earth, whether it's on another planet in another galaxy, or whether it's in an alternate dimension, that you would see you would see varying levels of intelligence of some form. Communicative intelligence where there is a consciousness behind it, and that has an ability to communicate in some way, perhaps in a language that we have no way of understanding at this point in time. But that's so I see intelligence as being this universal feature of life. And so I see these entities, I actually take these entities seriously, in that I actually take seriously the idea that they are conscious, that there is a within for these creatures. In other words, there's actually someone behind the eyes, so to speak, that's actually experiencing their world, and that they are experiencing us in some way. So that's the first thing. So then the question is, well, where is this place? And this is something that I've thought about a lot for several years now, and it's really the basis of this book. This idea that there's an alternate world, right? A parallel world of some, call it what you like, another dimension. The name isn't important. There's a place outside of this universe that is populated by this diverse ecology of hyperdimensional beings of extreme intelligence. That in itself, while quite remarkable, isn't that remarkable, because even the most conservative of physicists would never rule out the possibility that there are other universes or other realities. What's astonishing, and this is the key point, is that we have the facility, we have the ability to access these worlds with such facility by inhaling a couple of lungfuls of one of the simplest alkaloids in the plant kingdom. That's the most astonishing thing. And so my question is, if this world exists, how does DMT allow you to interface with that world? That's the question. And that's the difficult question to answer. And people have tried. People have said, in a very hand-waving sense, well, I think DMT tunes the brain to a different reality, like a radio. And okay, fine. But how does that work? If someone asks you to explain to them how a radio worked, and you could say, well, it tunes itself to different channels. Well, that's not good enough. You'd say, well, okay, let's open it up and let's have a look at what's actually happening. Oh, I see. It's got these receiving coils, and they have varying electrical activity, and it allows it to pick up radio waves. That makes sense now. So you have to do this with DMT. It's actually, what's DMT doing to the brain that allows it to receive to receive information from this alternate universe. So the fundamental point of the book, firstly, and as I mentioned earlier on, is that your brain is always constructing your world from information. And this is the same for the waking world, it's the same for the dream world, and it's also the same for the DMT world, or any world you experience. So if the DMT world is real, or in the sense that it actually contains beings that are conscious and are as real as we are, in a sense, what's required for us to experience this world is two things. First of all, information from that alternate reality, that orthogonal dimension, has to enter your brain, and your brain must make sense of it in a way and actually start constructing an alternate model of reality that we experience as the DMT space. So the brain doesn't know kind of what the true nature of the DMT space any more than it knows the true nature of the external world. It's always building models of reality. So it builds a model of whatever this DMT space really is. It builds a model of it, which is experienced as the DMT world that you go to when you have this trip. So that's really important. You don't have to travel to this place as such. You have to receive sufficient information from this space such that your brain can actually start constructing this model of the DMT space, which is experienced as the DMT world. So that's really what the book is about. It's about how can we reframe the way that we think about reality under normal circumstances? How can we look at the fundamental structure of reality and relate that to what the brain is doing and how the brain is structured? How did we get here? How did complex organisms evolve? How did they evolve to start building models of reality that they experience subjectively? And how does that relate to what's going on in the external world in terms of the flow of information? And then to think about what do psychedelics do? Well, they change the information being generated by the brain. They change the world. And so but with DMT, it's a very, very profound change. It's like Terence McKenna used to call it, it's a 100% reality switch. So DMT changes the information generated by the brain such that the brain no longer constructs in any form the normal waking world, the normal, what we call the consensus world. But it starts to construct this alternate model of reality, which experience the DMT world. And how can we use that fact to understand how information can be, in a sense, gated? So the flow of information can begin from this alternate, this orthogonal dimension within which these intelligent beings reside, and thus allowing us to not only communicate with that, but actually temporarily become part of this hyperdimensional space. And then the question is, well, why does DMT do that then? Why does DMT have this role? Why only DMT allows you access to this particular space, at least in normal doses? And so the book is really about trying to put everything together as this coherent, cogent vision of reality, which starts from what is the fundamental structure of reality, all the way through to what is the relationship between reality and DMT, and I talk about something I call the game. So the full title of the book is Alien Information Theory, Psychedelic Drug Technologies and the Cosmic Game. So I see our reality as being this game that we are essentially, we find ourselves emergent within. We find ourselves playing this game. And the ultimate aim of the game is to escape it, is to actually leave not just the Earth, but actually leave the constraints of our lower dimensional universe, essentially. Because fundamentally, I think that everything is constructed from information. That is the fundamental ground of reality. That's becoming more and more mainstream now. I mean, it goes back to, for sure, Conrad Zuse and John Wheeler, the famous It from Bit, his famous neologism. So he basically said that fundamentally reality is constructed from information, and a lot of people have run with this idea. And it's becoming.
Yeah, Elon Musk recently talking out about it, and it got a lot of attention. Yeah. Like a 1 in a billion chance that we are in a base level reality and it's not a simulation.
Yeah,
that's it's a pretty staggering statement.
Yeah, I mean, I distance myself a little bit from simulation theory because people talk about simulations, and I don't think they necessarily understand what a simulation is. So a simulation requires two things. It requires the simulation, and it also requires the thing being simulated. There's two parts to it. Mm-hmm. So if we are a simulation, the next question is, so what does the real world look like? I don't think that's correct. I always say reality is not a simulation. It's an instantiation. it's a version of reality, and it might be encoded, and that's actually what I argue for in the book. But I don't think it's encoded as a simulation of, our ancestors or the world a billion years ago or something like that. I don't think that. No, I think
right. You don't think we are sitting in an Xbox 10 on a kid's bookshelf, from the year 2525, essentially, which would make us a simulation. Like if this is the future trying to simulate the past in order to fix something or figure something out,
that would be a simulation.
Or whatever.
Yeah, that would be a simulation, but I don't think that's the case. I think we were created, and it's. There is kind of a fine line between simulation theory and creationism in a way, because the simulator is, in a sense, the God, right? He created. And I don't believe that. I believe that we did emerge, but I believe so this idea of emergence theory, the idea that simple things at the ground level, so information, basically digital information at the ground of reality, can self-organize and self-complexify. As long as you get the rules correct for the way these fundamental pieces of information interact with each other, you can get very, very complex behavior. And this can self-complexify and self-organize over many, many layers of organization that we would experience as subatomic particles, up through to, from quarks up to atoms, up to molecules, up to cells, up to living organisms, right? This is a layer of complexification, a hierarchical organization of complex systems. And I see this as being something that emerges under certain circumstances. So imagine having a trillion different universes, where each with slightly different fundamental, what we call the rule set. So the way that these fundamental digital information at the ground of reality interact with each other is slightly different in each universe. And if you were a physicist, you would say, well, this is the multiverse theory, and the idea that the fundamental constants are slightly different in all these different universes, and only some of them will give rise to complex behavior. That's what I subscribe to. I think the idea, if you're going to encode a universe, what you don't do is think, okay, I need to encode it this way, and then it will produce, living organisms eventually. No, what you do is you encode all possible variations. You have a combinatorial approach where you and it's actually, and there's a computer scientist called Jürgen Schmidhuber, I think his name is. And he wrote a really interesting paper, which basically showed that computationally it's cheaper to run all possible universes than it is to try and find the exact one that is to get it right. So you just run all of them. Why not? Yeah?
Interesting.
And then a few of them will exhibit complex behavior. We find ourselves emergent within one of these very, very small number, I assume, of universes in which complex life emerges. Then this is where the interesting question arises, is, okay, so whoever generated the code that created the universes, they've got a bit of a conundrum, right? They've just encoded all of these universes, and they've noticed that one of them has started to people, as Alan Watts would say, right? It's peopling, right? What am I going to do? How do I communicate with these little beings? I can't just type data in; they won't understand it. I have to find a way for them, in a sense, to find their way. Exactly.
Bridge.
And so I think DMT is that. I think DMT is the message that's been scattered, embedded in our reality, and it's just waiting for the person, the conscious being that is capable of reading the message, i.e., conscious being that's capable of identifying DMT, extracting it, all of this quite advanced chemistry, actually, relative to what other species can do, isolate it, and then learn to use it.
Yeah.
And this is, we're at the stage now of learning to use it. We're learning now to move past little glass pipes or whatever. And hopefully, I think my contribution is towards that end, and actually helping to develop the way that DMT, this message, is actually used, so that I think we owe it, in a sense, to, if we really take seriously the idea that DMT is allowing communication with beings from an alternate dimension, then it makes perfect sense that we would bring our best, I always say, our best tools to the table. We shouldn't leave anything off the table. If that means lying someone on a gurney or a bed and giving them an infusion by intravenous injection, then we should do that. And there might be other techniques that are complementary to that. Sure, I'm not saying this is the be all and end all by any stretch, but we certainly shouldn't be.
Right.
It's dangerous when you get rigidification of ideas about the way things should be done, and that leads to stasis. And you can see that with I won't mention any particular ones, with major religions, and the way that they're unable to move past these very, very rigid ideas that have sat and cannot be challenged for thousands of years, perhaps. That's dangerous, and that will mean that we become stagnant. We will stagnate.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to keep pushing, and eventually, who knows, when you put someone into the DMT space for 5, 6, 7 hours or 2 or 3 days, who knows how that is going to pan out and what kind of message or information could be received.
Right. So is that your ultimate aim, is to sort of create essentially map the DMT realm with using this approach and technique, and creating like some sort of do you envision the future having like a programmable machine to that anyone could go down to the all new Rite Aid, DMT friendly, pick up your DMT machine and
exactly.
help us to map what's going on here.
Yeah, I remember Terence McKenna wrote an essay called New Maps of Hyperspace. I thought that was a great title. And I think we're a long way from having these new maps of hyperspace. But I think, firstly, a lot of people dismiss the idea. They say there's no fucking way you can map the DMT space. It's too insane.
Right.
But what people forget, actually, is that when you go into the DMT, people forget, first of all, they don't realize. Please read my papers and you will realize that your brain is always constructing the DMT space. Even when you're in the DMT space, and the brain has to actually, in a sense, learn to construct this space in the same way that it had to learn to construct the world around you. The difference is that your brain learned to construct the world around you over millions of years of evolution. And from the moment you're born, you're flooded with sensory information. You're gradually constructing the stable and predictable model of reality. Now, and we would say it's straightforward then to map the world outside of our brain, the normal waking world. But with DMT, your brain rarely gets access to this space. And so it's trying to make sense. It's receiving all this information. It's trying to construct a model of reality that kind of works, that makes sense, that dovetails with the information it's receiving. And that's not surprising that when you go there for 4, 5, 6 minutes in a normal DMT trip, not surprising it's extremely chaotic and difficult to navigate. But who knows? If you put someone into the DMT space for several days, then you are essentially, in a quite literal way, changing the structure of their brain. The brain changes as it receives information. The strengths of the synaptic connections change, and it starts constructing a different model of reality. And so essentially the brain will quite literally kind of learn how to construct the DMT space. And no one's ever experienced that, so no one really knows. It's kind of like judging the world based upon the perception of a baby that's just a few hours old. Right. All right?
It probably thinks this is the trippiest, weirdest. Who are these aliens?
Yeah, exactly.
These big aliens. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, it's exactly that same idea. And of course, we don't do that. We allow an individual.
Who are these aliens that are a million times that are a million times? Sorry to cut you off, but who are these aliens that are a million times smarter than us? Right? Yeah, exactly. Or appear to be a million times more in the know than I do. Exactly like you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So you are, in a sense, you're like a child just emerging from the womb. You're bursting out of this womb into this very, very weird, completely alien appearing space, and expecting that the way the way that you experience it in those 2 or 3 minutes that you're there is kind of the be all and end all, and that's the end. And I'm saying, actually, no. You need to think about what happens over extended periods and the way that the brain can actually start to
Interesting.
learn. So people don't consider this idea. So I think it's important.
Yeah. It's a pretty fascinating approach. I definitely look forward to using your DMT machine when it comes in, when it hits the local
Walmart.
Rite Aid.
Yeah.
I'm there. I'm consider me a pre-order. So, I'm curious what you think on recently Alex Jones, kind of a controversial figure on the Joe Rogan podcast, who is a big proponent of DMT. And he was talking about this idea that the CIA is using DMT to communicate with aliens. Obviously your book talks all about the idea of communicating with these entities. What do you think about the government and what he's suggesting here as using this as a communication method?
Yeah, I mean, I think people, it's easy to have the kind of the obvious response, say, oh, he's just fucking nuts, right? And that's the obvious response. But I always try to be a little bit more careful about the way that I judge someone's words. And if you get kind of past this, and all of that kind of clockwork elves, all that kind of stuff, and the kind of the craziness, and actually think, well, actually, what he's saying totally insane? Maybe not, because for me, anyway, I mean, as I've said, I do take seriously the idea that there are conscious intelligences in this space, so with which we can learn to communicate. So I believe that. So I can't dismiss that idea. And secondly, when it comes to these hidden arms of intelligence agencies, we know now from declassified documents that they've been using psychedelics or have used psychedelics for decades, particularly LSD, but other psychedelics as well. And it would be extremely surprising if they hadn't at least looked at DMT. And if they had taken it seriously, like I do, then where would they be from the 1960s or wherever to now? If there was a continuous program to explore the DMT space, well, I would say that they would be pretty far down that road, and the road that I'm thinking of people going now. So, it wouldn't surprise me entirely. Well, it would surprise me, but it wouldn't completely surprise me if the CIA or whatever rogue arms of the intelligence agencies, Jones calls them, were actually using DMT to communicate. Now, whether they're brokering interdimensional deals, I mean, that's a whole
nother thing. Maybe they're just maybe they've just mapped the whole DMT space, and now their families, us normal folk, we go to Hawaii. They go to on vacation with the family to the DMT, DMT realm of choice for a few good days of getaway.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's places for the kids. You can send the kids to the elf theater.
Right. The elf realm.
Whilst you go to, the bar, the trans-dimensional, hyperdimensional bar.
Like the Star Wars bar.
Exactly, yeah. So that's the future, I think.
The cantina.
It's astonishing, right?
It's so good. Oh, man. So, I love getting stories of synchronicity or serendipity or positive paranormal stories, or maybe you have some stories of, your experiences interacting with some of these beings. Any and all of the above. I'd love to hear what you got. Yeah. So, in terms of my DMT experiences, I should probably give one brief one. Probably the most profound experience I had was when I one Sunday afternoon back in the UK, and I had this new glass vapor genie, which at the time was all the rage, this ideal way of smoking DMT. And I took quite a large hit, and I broke through almost instantaneously, burst into this space, and it was this domed space. It was quite dark, and it was like a dark cave, and there was either water at my feet or some kind of obscure fluid of some sort. And in the distance was this hooded being who was stirring, and he seemed to be creating all of reality using this staff that he had in his hand. And I kind of floated over to him, and he didn't notice me at first. And then as I got closer, he lifted his head. I don't remember his face at all. And I remember saying in my head to him, I said, show me what you've got. I want to see it.
which was probably the worst mistake to make. and I remember him coming over to me, and he got really close, and like a school teacher kind of leaning over and looking right into your face, and then he opened his mouth, and all I remember was going.
Wow!
It's like God Himself had just opened His mouth to me, and I remember that being the most shattering, by far the most shattering experience I've ever had in my life. Unfortunately, I can't tell you the details. I just remember when He opened His mouth that was it. He showed me it, and so and that's one of the things that kind of draws me back. It's like if we can actually kind of pull some information back here from these kind of experiences. Get past the astonishment and actually bring information back. Yeah,
sure.
So that's a DMT. In terms of synchronicity or paranormal experiences, well, interestingly, since I was a school child, since I was maybe 7 years old, I was interested in ghosts and the paranormal and the occult, but strange things, much to the dismay of my school teachers. My parents didn't seem to mind for some reason, but my school teachers, my parents would sometimes have to go in and speak to the headmaster, as we call them in the UK, the principal, about my stories that I was writing, these horrific stories. But anyway, my mother went to see a psychic when I was about 15 years old. My mother went to see a psychic, and I think I don't, due to a penny, I think psychics. A lot of them are charlatans. I don't take a lot of them seriously.
Right.
There are exceptions, of course. But
I found if it comes to me sort of organically in a way, I used to would seek it out, and now it's like if it just comes to me, and I've had some really profound experiences, but I've also, especially when I sought it out proactively, what ended up being just a waste of time, energy, and even money. But then I've had experiences that have been really, really profound. So I've had a mixed bag, and so I hear you.
Yeah, so this was a psychic woman that actually came to the place where my mum worked. Both of these, I'm going to tell two little things, both to do with my mother. So this psychic came to visit, and my mother, she went to the room, and the psychic told her, everything that's going to happen, all about our family. And then when she came home, she spoke about what she'd said about the psychic had said about each of us. I've got 4 brothers, you see, so we've got a large family.
Okay.
Yeah, and so and when she came to me, she said, the psychic said that you're taking drugs, but you're fine. And I thought, okay, that's interesting, but I'm a 15-year-old kid, so come on.
Right.
Yeah, but then she said, he's special. He talks to the gods. Wow. And I thought, whoa, first of all, I mean, looking back, I think, what an odd thing to say about a 15-year-old boy, right? He talks to the gods. And yet it resonated with me because I'd always had this idea that there were spirits and that we could communicate with them. And also, I at the time I just started using Ouija boards with my friends. This was literally the time when I had started experimenting with Ouija boards. So I thought that was uncanny. I mean, she could have said lots of things about 15-year-old teenage boys. To pick on something that is actually quite rare. I don't think many teenage boys are particularly interested in the occult. It's relatively rare, reasonably. That struck me. So that was a long time ago. And then last year, literally, we had a cat called Tom who lived at my parents' house back in the UK, and I was very close with him. Certainly more so than my mother. My mum is frightened of anything with fur, so she didn't like the cat.
My mom doesn't care for cats either.
Yeah, the cat was originally my older brother's. He got divorced, and the cat was temporarily placed at our house, and then it became permanent. Anyway, I fell in love with this cat, and I absolutely adored him. He was getting pretty old though by last year. He was sort of 18 or 19 years old. But I had no idea there's anything wrong with him or anything like that. And my mum, so I'm obviously in Okinawa in Japan, thousands of miles away. My mum normally, she's the one who kind of speaks to me. I'm not very proactive with speaking to family. But she always messages me on Facebook, and she always says the same thing. Hi, Andrew, how are you? Normal conversation. She always does that. And then we have a conversation, and then it's gone. And one Saturday evening, I was just sat and I was just working at my computer, and she sent me this message. She said, "Hi, Andrew, how are you?" No way. And instantly, I got this, like I'm being punched in the stomach. This gut, like shock feeling. And I thought,
wow,
Tom's dead.
Oh, wow.
And the cat. And then literally 10 seconds later, she sent me a message saying, sorry, but that Tom died today. Yeah.
Oh,
so that was,
wow.
Yeah. So that was shocking because there was no indication, there was no conversation that Tom wasn't very well, or that he was on his last legs or anything like that. So yeah, and so it just kind of shows you perhaps that there is this very deep connection between me and my mother, or me and the cat, maybe,
or both, or all of it, right? It's all connected.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And, I think with a lot of the psychic, stuff, or precognitive or intuitive sort of hits, it's not an exact science. So I think that's what's one of the tricky things for someone who's really going down that as like, I'm going to make my living doing this. Well, there's a lot of nuance to these energies. And I had a similar thing when I was like 11 years old with my grandfather. The day had no indication that he's going to pass that day, and it just came to me, he's going to pass today. And I looked at the clock to see what is the date, and and all these things. I played out the scenario in my head, and a couple hours later he dropped dead of a heart attack. Wow. And so it is. It's a fascinating thing to see. Sorry about the loss of your cat, by the way, but
he had a good life. He was
perhaps
pretty old.
Well, you can go visit him in the cat DMT dimension, I bet.
Sure,
so
yeah.
he's there waiting in the mouth of the hooded guy. So if you're willing to dive in again.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, this has been awesome, Andrew. You are epic, my friend. You're so fascinating to talk to. So intelligent. I love I love the fact that people like yourself are shining a bright light on this topic and really helping to give the credence it deserves, the respect that it deserves. This is not something that just a bunch of crazy drugged out hippies are partaking in, or dumb people, or people who want to ruin themselves. It's quite the opposite. People who are on the forefront of exploring consciousness, and psychonauts, right? And I absolutely applaud the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And what is the best way for people to follow your work and to get your book and connect with you?
So first port of call would be my website, buildingalienworlds.com. And on the website, there's a link to all of my academic papers and other popular articles that I've written. There's also a tab which is videos, so you can watch some of my lectures that I've given, or podcasts that I've done. And then there's the book tab, and there you can have a look at the book. You can see some sample pages and get an idea of what it looks like. And you can also order it directly from the website if you want. Alternatively, you can get the book from Amazon if you just search for Alien Information Theory. And then if you want to follow me on a more day-to-day basis, you can follow me on my Instagram, which is also Building Alien Worlds, or I tend to use Instagram more than Twitter, but my Twitter is Alien Insect. And I'm also on Facebook as Building Alien Worlds. I have a page on Facebook as well. So lots of means.
Cool.
Yeah.
Epic. Well, epic indeed. I do have one last question for you here, and it's my predictable outro question, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Andrew Gallimore?
The meaning of life is life itself. I think the meaning of life is this drama, this play, this crazy theater of reality that we are both constructing and interacting with at the same time. I don't see the meaning of life as being this great serious endeavor. I see it as a game. The game of life is a game, and I see it. We should treat it as that. We should play it sincerely, as you would play a game of chess, but we shouldn't take it seriously, and that's really important. And this is, I think, what DMT shows you is that we know so little. And if you take yourself too seriously, you're going to get a smack in the face at one point.
I love that. It's like, I don't quote the Bible a lot, but when I do, it's the scripture, lest you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And
Exactly.
that is it. This is a game. We're meant to play it, and we're meant to have fun. You're not meant to take it so serious and, and make the whole thing miserable as a result. And I must say, I am super thrilled that you showed up in my game to co-create and play with me today, Andrew. You are a pleasure and an inspiration, my friend. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, take care. Until next time, journey well, my friend.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you all know that we have finally created the Game with the Universe on our website, where you can choose the first number that comes to your mind, and it'll pull up that episode number of the podcast. I've been saying this is a great way to co-create synchronicity and magic with your higher self for quite some time by doing this manually. But now, if you go to positivehead.com/YO Universe, there is a super fun and simple interface to play this game with your higher self. I firmly believe just by setting the intention to play in this way, it opens up the door for magic, and it's a synchronistic way to hone in on nuggets of wisdom out of the huge catalog of episodes that are specifically appropriate for you at this time in your journey to becoming the next greatest and grandest version of yourself. And it also makes for a super fun way to engage and invite friends, family, people on social media to check out the podcast as well. So be sure to check out positivehead.com/YOUNIVERSE, and be sure to tell all your friends so they can play a game with the universe, which also helps the show to reach new people, which I greatly appreciate. And as a quick reminder, be sure to also check out positivehead.com/transformation if you're curious to learn more about Purium superfoods and why I take them every day. On this journey of becoming the next greatest and grandest version of ourselves that we have all embarked upon, I can't stress the importance of managing your physical vibration enough. And quite honestly, Purium has put together the simplest plan I've found to do so, and I'm sincerely excited to share it with all of you. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.